Okay. Welcome everybody. We'll get this going. Thank you for being a part of this. I'm going to go over just a few of the sort of the group norms. I'm sorry that's cut off, but I'd love to see y'all take a moment and edit your screen names to include where you're joining from, and if you're comfortable, your pronoun. We're asking folks to keep your mic muted when you're not speaking. If you're in a spot and feel comfortable turning your camera on, it's cool because it's just nice to see folks' faces. We're going to ask that you practice both and thinking. Both and thinking results in a collaborative mindset that allows for the validity of other perspectives and make space for individual views so they can coalesce into a solution that benefits all of us. The idea is that there are multiple experiences that are all true for the people having them. So make sure that you are creating space for other people's experience in your way of thinking. Step up, step back is a term that many of you are familiar with. It just means that it's a step up, step back thinking acknowledges that everyone has equal value in a discussion. Most of the time, white men speak first and loudest. It's often an unconscious reaction and is not intended to be offensive, but it's a reminder of systems of oppression that we've all internalized. So reflect on how you enter conversations and how you intentionally create space for other voices. Please use the chat or the little raise hand icon to ask questions. And we are still organizing more of these. So if you have something that you'd like to share with the greater Ultimate community that you think that you have a unique perspective on, please email me at youth.director@discnw.org and we'll get you on the schedule. My name is Jude. I'm the youth director at Disc Northwest, and I am one of the things about being a youth. There's a small number of us in the world, but I have learned so much from my conversations with Strat. Strat takes a really amazing approach, something that I've learned from and am so impressed by. And I'm very thankful that the DC area has them as the youth director, but also that they're so willing to share insight, expertise, and passion with the community. And I'm really happy that Strat is making time to do this with us today. I'm going to hand it over to Strat and turn off my mic, and you can take over.
Awesome. Thanks, Jude. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for being here. We'll get started. I hope that you have a quiet place where you can focus and a beverage if that's something you enjoy during these, and we'll get started. So let's see, screen share. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Great. So first, a little bit about me. I have been playing Ultimate since 2005 and organizing Ultimate since 2007, starting the high school team at my high school in Minnesota, and captaining college teams, coaching college. I've been working with youth since 2013 in education, recreation, and housing settings. I coached the Lewis and Clark College women's team for 3 years, and I have been a youth director since 2017, first in Portland, Oregon, and now here in DC. So I'm excited to share what I've learned with you over the years about season planning. Here's a quick agenda for what we're going to cover today. We're going to do a little pre-test, focus on the meat of season planning, and then give it a trial run. You'll need something to write with or write on, and we'll also be using the chat function to share some of our ideas. So the goals of this presentation, I want to ease the burden for coaching for largely volunteer coaching base. I remember when I first started coaching, I had no idea where to start, and planning an entire season for a college team seemed really daunting. And breaking it down, learning from others is how I figured out how to season plan. So each participant will develop a season plan for their ultimate team. It'll include both the prep, the on-field, and the off-field components. And we'll also build an awareness of some roadblocks to season planning and how to prepare for them. So get started. Here's your pretest. Hypothetical scenario: a vaccine has been created and developed. Authorities have informed us that we can begin practicing in groups of 20 to 30 people in public spaces starting in September. You're itching to play, get ready and plan your season. So take 5 minutes, plan your season. Think about your parameters. What's your age group? What's your skill level and ability of your team? How long is your season? What is the season length? What's the distribution of competitions throughout your season? So go ahead and take 5 minutes and give it a stab. What would you include in your season plan?
Strat, do you mind making the view on that full screen?
Yeah, how do I do that?
We're showing off all of our maps.
Let me see. Is that full screen now?
No, but that's better. That's bigger.
If I click present before then I can't see my Zoom in order to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that now.
That's great.
Wow, is that better? Oh, okay. Cool. About 2 more minutes for your season planning.
Can you put it back on the screen that had all the cues?
All right. Write your last practice or whatever the last piece of your season is, and we'll come back together. So besides sports-specific skills, drills, and practices and competitions, what else did you include in your season plan? Please share in the chat if you are willing to share. What else did you include? Anyone? Do you include anything besides sports specific things in your season plan? It's okay if not, because I can give you some examples. So besides on-field items like practices and competitions, which we will get to in the second half of the presentation, there's a lot of off-field stuff that goes into planning your season, especially as a coach. So I'm going to break it down thinking about it as a teacher. Teachers, besides classroom time, they have professional development, they have prep time, and they have meetings and gatherings. So first off, the professional development that you need as a coach, you're doing some of it right now, taking coach trainings, whether it's through the Disc Northwest virtual coach training, USAU, CDP trainings, Positive Coach Alliance offers some trainings, and your local disc org probably offers some trainings free or at reduced cost. You also want to make sure that you have all of your certifications in order, safe sport, make sure you have a background check, and any other trainings if your organization requires a bloodborne pathogens or CPR first aid. So that's just to get off the ground. Then you want to do some prep. Your off-field prep includes recruiting and planning. So first, on the high school side, you'll want to know when your high school activities fair is and make sure that you prepare for that. Bring a sheet of paper or an iPad where you can collect folks' contact information. This happens at college club fairs as well. But that's a really good place to get and recruit people who are wanting a new sport or a new activity to join. And then you'll want to have some sort of recruiting activity like a pickup game or your first practice. That's what you'll recruit people to when you're at your fair. You'll say, hey, come to this pickup game. This is where we're going to meet everybody. This is where we're going to play, or come to our first practice. It's on Tuesday, September 10th. Then you'll also want to have an informational meeting. So this often happens in high school. You will make sure that you have a advisor who is a teacher at your school and see if you can host in their classroom. At your activities or club fair, you will say, hey, our info meeting is on this date in, Mr. Loren's classroom after school. Come join and learn about Ultimate. There's a bunch of resources that I'll share after for how to host this informational meeting, example slides. And also you want to make sure that you show a game of Ultimate at your info meeting and then have a first practice. So that's all involved in recruiting. As far as planning, as a coach, you'll want to make sure that in the off season and preseason, you've done some reflecting and some goal setting. You'll need to meet with your captains and leadership in order to set both team goals and personal goals. You'll also meet with your team to set these goals. And like you just did, you'll do a skills breakdown and plan your season, knowing how many weeks you have, who your age level is, and what their skill and ability level is. Some meetings and gatherings that are included in your off-field portion of your season planning. You'll want to have this pre-season leadership meeting. This is where you meet with your captains that have been elected the season before. Have a pre-season team meeting. This is where you do, maybe this is your info meeting. Then you'll have an intro team meeting. This is where you do your goal setting. You figure out your big enough why. There's a bunch of resources out there, from Tina Booth to Amanda Kostick led one for the Disc Northwest virtual coach training, talking about how to do this goal setting, how to lead your team to figure out what they want. At the middle school and high school level, you could ask players, how they want to feel at the end of the season, what they want the team to feel like. And then I often recommend having a commitment meeting. So if it's a college team, in December, you would have a commitment meeting where folks decide how much they want to put into the team and thinking about the spring main season for the college season. And throughout the season, you'll want to have leadership check-ins, checking in with your captains. How are things going? What do you need to change as far as practices and competitions? What do they need? What are they feeling? And then this is, more on at the college level, teams will organize this. When you click, it goes to the next slide, apparently. Teams will organize a lot of these gatherings, but you can help at the high school level organize an end of semester gathering and end of season banquet. You can do this for YCC teams as well. So putting it all together, when does this off-field stuff happen? So this is my example from being a college coach. This is when a lot of the off-field stuff would happen. You'd make sure that in August, you have your club fair, your leadership meeting, a pickup game to recruit. In September, you've got that first team meeting, first practice, your goal setting. And then in December, you have your commitment meeting where you're thinking about the spring season. January and through May is the main season for college. You'll have your preseason team meeting where you're doing a lot of the logistics of USA Ultimate and also some more goal setting, thinking about that main season. You'll meet again with your captains. You'll do some season planning and lesson planning. And then again in April, you want to have a post-season prep team meeting where you think about, okay, what are our goals for regionals, sectionals, and then having your end of season banquet. All right, we're switching gears. So that was all the off-field stuff. Now we're thinking about the on-field stuff. So in 60 seconds on your own, on your sheet of paper, I want you to list off what you think are the fundamental skills of Ultimate and rank the skills in order of when you would teach them. Ready? On your mark, get set, go. Ten more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see what people came up with. So here's my list. Catching, throwing, marking in the force, cutting and defense. And you can decide if you teach defense first or cutting second. These will include, the mechanics of each of them, the mechanics of throwing, the mechanics and, footwork of marking, defense and cutting. You want to break cutting and defense down into downfield and handler cutting or defense. Is there anything I missed? What would you do differently? Would you teach things in a different order? Feel free to share in the chat. I want to see what you think, what you came up with. Culture building, nice. Info meeting. Oh, this was from before. Rules, good. Spirit of the game, yes. Yes, cutting and defense separate, nice. Great. Where would folks put rules? Does that go throughout? Would you do that at the beginning? Nice. I like one rule of practice. That's great. Nice, a rule a day. And I've done this in the past where I pair the rule with whatever we're teaching. So if you're doing marking in the force, you can talk about, marking fouls. If you're doing throwing, you can talk about marking fouls, traveling. Cool. Here's some tips from Maddie saying I've taken a lot of different coach trainings. This is what he said. This is also where I first developed my list of skills in order. He says, teach skills in order. Your practices are your learning, your class time, and the tournaments that are throughout your season are the tests. So as you have your tournaments or competitions, whether they're weekly games or weekend tournaments, what worked well for your opponents? Are you meeting your goals as a coach? And then go back and learn and do it better. These are good checkpoints. As you go throughout the season and planning your season, you're going to notice that maybe you need to spend more time on a certain skill or drill. Maybe you need to go back to something you learned, last semester. Make sure that you plan out at least 1 month of practices, but as you go, you can adjust. And be big picture. Check back in with your leadership. Check back in with your team. How are they feeling? Are they learning what you set out to learn at the beginning? So here's my example for how I space it out throughout the season. Okay. So starting out in September, marking the force, pivots and break throws, hucking. Of course, we start with catching and throwing and come back to that every practice, I would hope. In October, you can start working on cutting and running form, downfield cutting, downfield D in the force, dump set and handler movement. And at the college level, November can seem very short with midterms and Thanksgiving. So there's not a lot of time to cover things. And December, winter break seems to take up all of December with finals and winter break. Come the next semester, you can start working on both the individual skills of systems and also the team systems. So individual offense and defensive skills, and then team offense and sets and systems, and then team defense. So here is how I spread this out. Let's see if you can see this. So this was for the college team that I coached. We broke things down by week. We had a different practice focus each practice, and we had 2 practices a week plus a session on weekends or tournaments. One good rule of thumb is to focus on 1 to 2 topics per week, and 1 topic or skill per session. So then I was able to break it down even further. During marking week, we focus on marking and the force. You can focus on pivots and break throws. The next. And again, I was a younger coach, and I think I would readjust this as I've gained some skills and knowledge of how I would order things. Cutting and running form, deep cutting. Covering, marking again. I found as a coach, I overplanned, and I really wanted to move quickly through the concepts because I knew what needed to come next. But repetition was really important, and coming back to skills in order for players and the team to feel successful, I found to be really important. So you could plan out, 14 weeks of practice and then end up only needing 6 to 8 of those weeks, but repeating and coming back to the same skills. So I'm happy to share this version of a season plan with folks at the end of this. So like I mentioned, make sure to cover one or 2 skills per week max. 1 skill or concept per session. Make sure that you overplan, but also plan in cushion time. You may need to spend more time on a skill than you originally planned. Be flexible and willing to adjust. Again, like I said, as a younger coach, I really just wanted to move quickly through things, but now I know you gotta, meet your team where they're at. And take time to make sure that the entire team is on the same page about a concept, especially whether it's high school to college. You're going to get players who have a range of skills. You're going to get players who've had 2 to 3 years of experience, and then players who are just new to the sport. It's important to not just focus on the folks who come in with experience and with whether it's motor skills or natural athletic ability, but make sure that you can bring everyone up to the same level. All right, now I know we just went through a lot of things quickly, but I want to see how you would adjust your season plan. What would you add? Remember to include both your prep time and the off-field and on-field concepts. If you want me to go back to certain pages, I can, so we can show what you'd want to do for the prep or the off-field or on-field portions. Take about 3 to 5 minutes and see what you would add, how you would space out your season differently, given what we've gone over. Go ahead. Take about 30 more seconds to add to your season plan. All right, let's bring it back together. In the chat, I'd love to hear from folks how your season plan changed. What did you add that you didn't have before? What is something new that you thought of? Did you add some team meetings? Did you change the order of skills? Did you add in some time for leadership or captains check-ins? How did you break skills down by week or by number of practice sessions per week? Nice. Adding recruitment to your season plan. Miriam says, adding, what do you already know about Ultimate? That's good, like getting a little hook at the first practice. You can also do that at your first team meeting to get to your big enough why is, you know, why do you play Ultimate? What first attracted you to Ultimate? That can help you do some goal setting for your team too. Good, yes, adding flexibility for emergent issues. That has continuously been useful for me. Great. So I'm going to share some resources that I found really useful. So I showed that season plan earlier, which I'll send resources out via Jude after this, but practice planning templates have been really useful to me. So kind of just breaking down each practice into its different components. What will your welcome be? You know, how do people arrive? What's the first thing you do? Making sure that you have a competition in every practice. How do you end your practice? So this is how I kind of broke it down even more as a coach. Always having 2 goals for myself or the team per practice. I just learned last week, and this is something I did as a coach as well, but Ren Caldwell recommends, you know, starting each practice with mobility and rolling out, you know, and before you do your team warm up. Doing your full warm up, a warm up includes a throwing warm up, right? A disc warm up. Another practice planning resource is just having a whole worksheet. You know, what concept or skill are you going to focus on? What's your objective for that practice? What are the key components of the skill or strategy that you're going to cover? You know, so if you're covering marking, what are the key components of marking? You know, athletic stance, having a plan, from stall 1 to stall 10, active on your feet. What drill are you going to use to reinforce that concept or to practice it? How are you going to add layers to that drill? I know this is something we've covered in a lot of different coaching trainings, but I find having a worksheet to write out my plan really forces me to think about the details of the practice. How I'm going to demonstrate the skill. How many reps are we going to do? How are the reps going to be different? How are we going to differentiate the drill? What are we going to do in our scrimmage or competition at the end of practice that reinforces the concept that we're working on? A resource for how to break down a skill or drill. This is especially helpful for younger players as well, but how to intro what concept you'll be working on. Today, we're going to learn about the mark. Marking is important in order to prevent the thrower from getting off a downfield pass. The goal of marking is to get the thrower to a high stall count. Common mistakes in marking include not moving your feet, reaching, leaning to one side. You know that you're marking correctly if it is difficult for the thrower to get the throw off, or if you get them to a higher stall count, right? Learning targets from Melissa Davey. There's a really great resource on Minnesota Ultimate. Their coaching resources page has a lot of stuff from Melissa Davey. She and Sky Davey are, integral in the Minnesota Ultimate team. They're both teachers. So Melissa put a lot of resources together. I haven't thought about before Ultimate as, skill learning, but with the Disc Northwest virtual coach training, I'm learning a lot about how we coaches are teachers, and how we can break down what we're coaching into what we want our players to be learning. And I like how a lot of folks on this training already have mentioned sphere of the game and rules. So you can have that as one of your learning targets: sportsmanship and rules. Mechanics, what can players do as first years to the sport, second years, and so on. Teachers know this, but a lot of the learning targets are broken down into player or student can do XYZ. I've read a lot of different state PE teacher standards, and they include physically literate student can throw a disc or can pivot, can dribble a ball. So how can you break down what you want your players to teach into I can statements? What can they do? Throw a flat backhand, a flat forehand, without a mark, with a mark. And then the long-term athlete development, I found super useful in how to break down and make Ultimate different depending on age group. I know that Sam Callan at USAU is hosting a long-term athletic development session later this week, I think on Thursday. So keep an eye out for that in your inboxes. And I just want to give some credit to a lot of the folks who have taught me how to coach. Sean Parker was the boys coach at Lewis and Clark when I was coaching the women's team, and he shared that season planning document with me. I've already mentioned Melissa Davey, Maddie Sang, Fury coach and longtime coach, teacher of coaches. And of course, Tina Booth. When I kept saying big enough why, that's from Tina Booth, and she talks about how to get to your big enough why for your team. So I want to open it up to questions. Any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you'd rather ask it in the chat, we can answer it from there. What are you wondering about? What have we not covered that you were interested in coming into this session?
You mentioned that you find yourself kind of process driven. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, where you like, you know what you want to get to, and so you plan it all out and you map out your season and you kind of stick to that. I run into the same thing. Like, I know that by the end of my 8th grade season, I want all of our 8th graders to know these things. And so I build a season plan based on that. And what I struggle with is sort of bringing the top of the roster up, like elevating their experience, while also like helping the bottom of the roster catch up a little bit. And so what I find myself doing often is having to, after a weekend of games, having to come back and be like, okay, clearly I didn't do a good enough job teaching everybody this thing. So we're going to double back on that. How do you handle those moments? How do you make those experiences valuable for the players who clearly already grasp those big ideas, but there's still some that you're trying to catch up?
That's a great question. I know myself as a coach, I am very hypercritical, so I can get lost in thinking about, oh, like I have to work on all these different things and where do we start? But what you first mentioned, having those kind of 2 tiers of your roster, maybe you have 3 tiers. Again, in terms of planning, I think it's helpful to go back to some of those worksheets. So let's say you have your skill concept worksheet, right? Oops, I meant this one. Your practice planning worksheet. In your practice plan, you can plan for that and list out, okay, these are what I want, these different levels to be working on. So that's part of the scaffolding. So I would make like columns of, okay, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or you could use, Melissa Davies, year 1 I can statements. But if you have your top of the level roster, what could they be working on? And a lot of it is disc skills, I find, but how is their aim on their throws? Are they throwing the first open pass or not? And how to kind of check in with yourself, how you're both bringing the newer players up and having that column of, okay, I want these 3 goals for these players, but I have these 3 goals for these players. And it's a lot, especially if you're coaching on your own, to be able to give that feedback in practice. So I would hope that you have assistant coaches who you can share, okay, these are the goals for this level, these are the goals for this level, and working with those. If you don't have an assistant coach, maybe taking time outside of practice, especially with those tier 2, tier 3 players, the higher level players, to one-on-one check in, like, hey, this is what I think you could work on. I know I myself as a player really appreciated those individual emails from coaches, like, you do this really well, here's how you could take your game to the next level. And that maybe one-on-one or like kind of outside of practice works better for those players because they're already hypercritical. They're already thinking, how can I play better? So calling it out on the side may work as well.
On the subject of feedback, have you, our coaching team for the first year, for the first season last fall, did a end of the year, essentially like a report card. I don't remember what we called it because that's intimidating. But we did a thing like, hey, this is where you are at the end of the season. And we ended up sending an email with all of this, with this really complicated Google sheet. It's sweet, actually. And then with some pluses and some deltas for each player and some very specific feedback. I'm wondering if you've ever done anything like that, how that was received, and what I'm looking to develop that a little bit. So I'd love your insight, or anybody else who's on the call. Like, if they've done that, what would they be trying to hand to their players at the end of a season?
Yeah, I'll open it up if anyone else wants to share. I have some ideas that if folks are able to participate, if not, that's fine. I think we have some working parents on this call. Well, I can share what's worked for me in terms of giving individual player feedback. I would say that that can be really daunting, and I've done it in a couple of different ways, and I've also received that feedback in a couple different ways. I find that, right, if you have 26 players and you want to give really specific feedback to every 26 of them, you're going to need more eyes than just yourself. I know myself as a coach, I only had myself to give that feedback. So, you know, creating a spreadsheet, and you kind of have to simplify it. You can't give too much. So just one positive, one negative. Like, this is what you're doing really well. This is what I'd recommend you work on, and phrasing it in a more positives to negatives. But that way you can easily collect it all in a spreadsheet and then send it out via email. This year for YCC tryouts for WAFC, that's something that we wanted to do. It was new this year, but taking our combine and making an actual combine where every single player got a piece of feedback was not easy for a combine of 180 people. So breaking that down, and we would improve it again next year, but one thing that you're doing well, one thing that you already have grasped, and one thing to improve on. And making sure that when you're phrasing it to the players, not saying positive or negative, but like, this is a concept that you have grasped. I'm trying to, there's a better word for it. And then these are some things, areas for improvement. I'm curious to hear about your Google Sheet, Jude. What oh, you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, I was just actually looking at it on my Google Sheet. I can share it. It's pretty interesting. We automated a bunch of stuff.
I can stop sharing here.
Give me a moment.
So Jude, did you guys do this for middle schoolers?
We did.
Oh yeah. And how was it received?
A lot of kids really, you know, I got emails back from them that said, "Oh, this is awesome. Thank you. I appreciate this feedback. These are the things," or asked for advice on how they could work on the things that they were interested in, or that we had sort of pinpointed. And some, and then, well, I think a lot of kids just never even opened the email, or parents never even opened the email, which is fine too. For us, it was really pretty easy. It made things easier going into the next season. It helped us kind of figure out where we needed to work on for the whole team, and also what we, whoops, I'm going to black out the player names. So what we did is I created these different categories here, across the top: forehand, backhand, catching, defense, field vision, defense. Again, that was a mistake. Tactical understanding, endurance, agility, speed, composure, commitment, concentration and focus, attitude, and teamwork. The concentration, attitude, and teamwork were more the intention there. We, in the form that I sent out for the coaches to fill out, there was details, but that was sort of focusing on like spirit of the game kind of stuff, really, or how disruptive they were, and you know, they're middle schoolers, right? So there was that stuff. And then what we did is we did some things to see where kids were, this kind of based on the feedback from a bunch of different coaches. We have a very lucky, pretty privileged to have a bunch of different coaches, but you could do this with one or two coaches. Did some standard deviation. No, that's not standard deviation. I mean, it's what I called it, but that's not really what it is. Created the comments, and then we did created a thing that compiled them all into one, so that I could do a little pull down, and it compiled them all, so I could just copy and paste this and put this right into emails. So it pulled everybody's pluses, everybody's deltas there, and gave them, instead of giving them these scores of like where they stood, I created a naming convention: average, above average, average, above average. The idea being that represented where they were within the scope of the team that they were on. And so I want to refine this a little bit more, make it a little more palatable, a little less harsh. I think it could have come off as being pretty harsh, but because we had so much input from a bunch of different coaches, I actually think it was pretty reflective of the skills on the team. So this is, and then we had two different teams, one called the Nice Kids and one called the Hydro Flasks. And so we did it for each kid. Yeah, it was interesting to go back and see how our coaches saw the players. This one was really interesting because it kind of showed how people read. This showed the coach variance, right? So like massive coaches saw this particular player, Ming, in massively different ways. Like our estimation of them, I think she's one of our best all-time defenders ever. Like, she's just filthy. And then we'll say, I'm sorry, after she D's somebody, which is hysterical. But it also helped us as coaches kind of reflect on how we're viewing players and seeing what we're valuing, and allowed us to come together for our preseason meeting and be like, hey, why, maybe we're not looking for the same things. Let's talk about what we value as a team, a coaching culture. Anyways, that's it. I'm sorry. I took over your thing.
No, you're good. I'm curious if you'll share that with me after this.
Sure. Yeah, it could be all pretty copy paste. You could use it for anything.
Well, great. I guess I'll just close us out and say thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions or if you want to follow up, my contact info is just strat@wafc.org. If you want to support WAFC Youth Ultimate, you can donate to our PayPal donation page. And happy season planning. I hope that you can use this downtime to think about how you can, develop your season plans further.